everyone. Thank you for coming. On behalf of PCC Sustainability and Cascade ASPCC, I want to welcome you to our feature event for Earth Week 2015. Today, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Andy Bickelbaum and Mike Bonanno from the Yes Men. Andy is in the last year of a 4-year appointment as visiting associate professor at NYU. He also directs the Critical Tactics Lab there, and in previous years, he was a computer games programmer and author of 2 books of short fiction. Mike is an associate professor of media art at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. In addition to his work with the Yes Men, he is on the board of the Center for Land Use Interpretation and directs RPI's Technical Media Lab. So without further ado, I give you the Yes Men.
Wow, okay. Well, thank you so much for having us here. This kind of thing is actually what also makes possible what we do. We've been making films. We've made 3 movies in the past 14 or 15 years. And they're all about impersonating people in power in order to make more public their wrongdoing. So we infiltrate events, we go to corporate business meetings, we go to public events sometimes, and we pretend to be those powerful people, whether it be government figures or business people from the world of business. We started out doing this in around 1999, and it was because we wanted to go to the protests against the World Trade Organization in Seattle, but we weren't able to. We just didn't have it together to get there. We were on the East Coast. So, wanting to kind of join in the action, we put together a fake website that looked like the WTO website, but was satirical. You know, it had the kind of information on there that we thought would make people notice it wasn't really the WTO's website. For example, suggesting outlawing the siesta in Spain because it gets in the way of work. You know, these are a funny idea, but it's an idea that actually was really on people's minds at the time in '99 when this free trade agenda was being pushed in so many places in the world. And part of that free trade agenda included what was called the harmonization of business practices. And harmonization extended not only to all kinds of things like work hours, but also to culture, to different ways of living, different ways of working, to schedules. So, and it was a big issue in Europe at the time, and that's why, you know, it seemed like a funny thing to suggest that the WTO would outlaw the siesta in Spain, outlaw sleeping, for example, in places in the world where people like to do that in the middle of the day, because it was just an extension of their current policy. Of the direction things seem to be headed in. We were surprised when people looked at that website and didn't notice that it was funny and started inviting us to conferences. And they did that largely because the WTO itself got very alarmed about the fake website and held a press conference where the Director General of the WTO denounced it and said that it was really deplorable. He actually used the word deplorable, which then meant that it got a lot of media attention, which then meant that it got a higher ranking in the search engines, which at the time did not label something as satire, as they often do today. The search engines have gotten a little smarter. This was actually before Google. And so then suddenly we had this very high-ranked website called GATT.org that looked like the WTO's site, and if people went to the real WTO's site, there was no contact button. There was no way to get in touch with the WTO on their website, despite their message being that they were completely transparent. But their version of transparency was to say we put everything on the web, which meant that they had at that time 2 million legal documents posted and accessible. Now, nobody can read 2 million documents in the first place, but also nobody who's not a lawyer can. So people would go there, they'd get frustrated, they'd go to the next link down, which was GATT.org. The Global Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was the predecessor agreement to the WTO. And they'd find our website, and there's a big contact button, and they'd get in touch. And they'd ask us questions about global trade. And we'd answer. Or at least we'd try. We had to learn a little bit first. Like we had to learn that a good part of the sort of neoliberal agenda was simply to allow money to do whatever it wanted. And there was this belief that if you let money rule, then everybody would benefit in the end. And everybody who's kind of been on the receiving end of that kind of power relationship at one time or another in their lives probably realizes that that's not necessarily true. In some rare occasions, it is true. It does work out okay to let the rich do what they want occasionally. But most of the time, there need to be rules in place to protect those who don't have money from those who do, or to protect the environment from, let's say, predatory practices that would otherwise cut down all the trees or extract all the water. So anyway, pretty soon we got invited to a conference by people who thought we really were the WTO. And at the time, we didn't know what to do because the invitation came in. We had never actually actively impersonated people before. And the invitation was from Mike Moore, the Director General of the WTO. And so our first thought was, oh, Michael Moore, the filmmaker, has the same name. What if we send him? So we sent him an email, but he never responded. So we were the only thing that we had left, the only resource. So we suggested Dr. Andreas Bickelbauer go instead, which was Andy. And Andy did, and he presented that the first time at an international trade law conference in Salzburg, where everybody thought that he actually was from the WTO. And what we expected at that moment was that we would get kicked out, because we put together a PowerPoint presentation, as you do when you go to a conference. And the presentation was all about how to create a free market in democracy, how to bring democracy and capitalism closer together by allowing corporations to buy votes directly from people. Instead of having this vastly inefficient system, we have an election cycle coming up, so everybody can see the inefficiency in this process that's coming up. There is not really a free market out there for the election, or it's getting closer and closer, but after Citizens United and stuff, we keep moving closer and closer to it being a free market. But instead, it's this inefficient system where people pay for advertisement, people pay for lobbying, people pay all along the way. There's all this money being hemorrhaged, when really all we could do is cut all of that apparatus out and let people just sell their votes directly. We made that proposal. Surprisingly enough, nobody in the room objected. A room full of international trade lawyers. They didn't embrace the idea, they just accepted it. And they still wanted our business cards. They still wanted to have lunch with us. There were no handcuffs. There was no Austrian jail. We kept expecting that the worst was going to happen, and we brought a video camera along to witness our arrest, because that's what we thought was going to happen. When that didn't happen, we realized that we were in the middle of something really interesting. For one thing, we were conducting a psychology experiment that we didn't know about, right? Because it was a bit like the Milgram study or something, where people just go along with what the person in power says, no matter how repulsive it is. So that was one part of it. People were going along with it. Why they were going along with it, we weren't sure. Could it be because they just respected us so much? Could it be because they were afraid of us? Could it be because they just needed our business card? And that's all they needed. When they got home, they were going to contact us and try to work out some trade deal. Or, we met a guy from Madeira, for example, who had an interest in bananas, at the luncheon afterward. He just wanted to make sure that we knew everything about Madeira and bananas and the interests of their country. He didn't care anything about what we said about democracy. So in the end, we realized that we also were in a situation where what we were doing was very good for a film, because we weren't just going to make a tiny little video of being arrested. There was a whole process that we were going through, a process of anticipation, wondering what would happen, presenting a crazy idea, and then showing the audience reaction. And so this launched us into a process where now we've made 3 films. We've been doing this for 15 years. And we've moved on from initially dealing with the World Trade Organization as our main focus, because there was a whole movement around that at the time, to moving on to a bunch of different issues. And today, dealing, for the most part, in our current film, with climate change, since climate change has really become the issue of issues. You know, it's the thing that if we don't fix, we can't fix any of the other things. All the other things get worse as climate change gets worse. And so we have a new movie coming out that's called The Yes Men Are Revolting, which is also about movements. Over the years, we've also changed our tactics. Now we work with organizations. We also realized that what we were doing, it was like being a kind of bizarre PR agency for activist causes. You know, we were collaborating with journalists. We were giving them an excuse to write stories about issues they already wanted to write about, but didn't necessarily have the editorial directive to do. So we got contacted by different organizations over the years who suggested that we should work on specific issues with them. And that's the way we work now, almost entirely in tandem with people who have an ongoing campaign of some kind, or with people who may not have a campaign but have a social movement behind them that's making specific demands of government, that needs a little bit more PR attention, a little bit more of the public's attention in order to push their agenda forward. And so what we like to do at things like this is show some video clips. And here's an example of one of the first times that we really worked with an organization. This is an excerpt from our second film. It's actually a little tiny little cut down excerpt. But on the 20th anniversary of the largest industrial accident in history, which was the Bhopal catastrophe in Bhopal, India, Greenpeace, actually, somebody who worked sometimes for Greenpeace, got in touch with us and asked us if we would help them to draw attention to the fact that Dow Chemical had bought Union Carbide and was now responsible for the legacy that Union Carbide had left behind in India. Because Union Carbide had not adequately compensated the victims of the Bhopal catastrophe, and they'd never cleaned up the plant site. So this huge industrial compound that was surrounded by shanty towns in Bhopal was still toxic, and actually the liners of the pools where they left all the pesticides was seeping down into the aquifer and now poisoning a whole third generation actually of people. So they asked us to do what we could. This is Andy, by the way. Yeah. He was out making a speech, over at the convention center. Yeah.
Sometimes it happens.
So, and now that he's here in person, let's play the video of him impersonating. Yeah, you can compare. Yeah. He's a little bit older, slightly older now, a year older. You can compare, his physique. Tell him about it later. No, this is him as Dow Chemical, as a representative of Dow Chemical on the BBC on the 20th anniversary of the Bhopal catastrophe, making an announcement that certainly nobody at Dow Chemical expected was going to happen, and also nobody at the BBC truly expected to happen either.
And you're watching BBC World, our main headlines. The world's worst industrial accident is being remembered in India today. It's 20 years since deadly gas leaked from the Union Carbide chemical plant in the city of Bhopal. At least 18,000 deaths are attributed to the leak, and many local people say the contamination has never been properly cleared up.
Yeah. Should I typically just look right into the camera? Okay.
People who are living in these houses, they've all got a story to tell about that day 20 years ago. Many of them lost members of their family, and they say that they're continuing to suffer because of the tragedy. And they're saying somebody needs to answer for this. Legally, what they're saying is that they want to pursue the company to try and clean up the site, but whether the company will accept liability seems doubtful.
Well, joining us live from Paris now is Jude Finisterra. He's a spokesman for Dow Chemicals, which took over Union Carbide. Good morning to you. A day of commemoration in Bhopal. Do you now accept responsibility for what happened?
Steve, yes. Today is a great day for all of us at Dow, and I think for millions of people around the world as well. It's 20 years since the disaster, and today I'm very very happy to announce that for the first time, Dow is accepting full responsibility for the Bhopal catastrophe. We have a $12 billion plan to finally, at long last, fully compensate the victims, including the 120,000 who may need medical care for their entire lives, and to fully and swiftly remediate the Bhopal plant site. And our shareholders may take a bit of a hit, Steve, but I think that if they're anything like me, they will be ecstatic to be part of such a historic occasion of doing right by those that we've wronged.
Just to reiterate what Jude Finisterra, the spokesman for Dow Chemicals, has just said, he says Dow Chemicals now fully accept responsibility for the events in Bhopal.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm gonna have a serious nervous breakdown now.
Dow accepts responsibility for Bhopal, .. spokesman.
Where is that?
In Reuters.
The hoax was an elaborate one involving a fake website.
All right. Thanks. So, as you might imagine, a few things happened after this. One of them you saw, there was news. In fact, it was the top story on Google News. Dow accepts responsibility. Magnificent, amazing. After all this time, they're doing it. And then, very shortly after that, there was a call from the BBC to to my apartment, and they had reached Dow, or actually more precisely the Union Carbide office, who knew that it still existed, and they said that there was no such person as Jude Finisterra, and I tried to argue with them and say, well, of course, Union Carbide's been dissolved. They would say that. They're angry. But that didn't go over, and they quickly announced that it was a fake, and immediately the headlines on Google News changed to hoax, and that remained the whole thing. That remained the top story on Google News for the rest of the day. So in total, I think there were about 600 articles about the hoax in the U.S. press on an occasion that is pretty important, the 20th anniversary of the biggest industrial disaster in history caused by a U.S. company due to absolute negligence because these people in India couldn't afford lawyers, basically. But it wasn't going to be covered in the U.S. press. So this actually permitted that, all those articles to be written. Another thing that happened, even more, well, that was sort of expected. We had hoped for that kind of result. Unexpectedly, the stock value of Dow took a $2 billion plunge as soon as the news went out that they were doing something good. And as soon as it was revealed that they weren't doing something good, the stock value came right back up. So the whole thing took about 20 minutes, $2 billion, $2 billion. And that seemed to us pretty illustrative of what's wrong. Like, if there were really great CEOs in these companies who did things like that, they would be fired. You know, you can't ruin your company and expect to keep your job. And that's what would have happened. The stock market would have punished Dow to the point where they simply couldn't continue, or they had to get rid of the leadership, or they had to change what they were doing. So we simulated that. It was like an experiment that proved that there's, you know, the fault is our market system that demands profit at all costs. And you can't do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. So I think there's been a lot of issues raised and probably some questions. Yeah? Yeah. I mean, there was a little, we found out about it through the press about it. Somebody had noticed this. I don't know how it got reported, but it did. And then, when we thought about it a bit, we realized it was a really good thing to really highlight. It actually became the centerpiece of our entire second movie. That was the proof around which the whole movie was built, that there's something wrong with our system. We have to change our system. We have to make a system that privileges people over profit and not the other way around. And that appealing to nice people in corporations, speaking to corporations, is useless. We've got to actually take over our government, basically, which doesn't have to be in a traditional revolutionary way. It can just be like getting people into office or pressuring the people who are in office to do the right thing. It's not going to matter if we change people's minds within corporations. So it got a little bit of press at the time, but then we took that and made it, gave it the press, so to speak, of our entire movie.
Are there other questions? Yeah.
Well, you had to ask.
Dow's like around a $100 billion company, so it was about 2% of their value.
That's why we don't say that.
Yeah, but it was significant because it was within 20 minutes you don't lose 2%. And one of the things that was a real problem for them is that they had to put the brake on all the automated sell orders because all these companies now have math that guides them. They're basically robots that look for precipitous drops and start selling accordingly. So it did cause them a major headache, and we were able to talk to some traders who went through that process, who had those heart attacks, had to get up in the middle of the night. And we did an interview with one independent guy who actually was woken up by his assistant in the middle of the night and had to go and change his position really quickly because it was dropping. So it did have major repercussions. We did another project with a group called US Uncut that was targeting GE, where we made an announcement that they were giving back a tax bonus that they had gotten from the government. They didn't pay any tax in the US that year, but they still got a handout, a huge handout at tax season. And the handout was something like $2.4 billion that time. And they lost exactly that amount when somehow the adjustments seem to, often they kind of work out to be, I don't know, it looks like they're equal to what they expect the company to lose. So that one kind of dropped $2.4 billion and then went back up again as well once it was announced as a hoax. Yeah. It happens. Unfortunately, we don't have $1 billion ourselves, otherwise we could get rich from this kind of thing, shorting the stock. That's illegal, but
So you've pissed off a lot of powerful people. Do you ever worry that they're going to take action against you? Have you ever gotten any threats from these corporations that you've sort of tricked into?
Yeah, we've gotten lots of threats.
But mostly just corporate lawyers, though, or
they're these things. They're cease and desist letters. They're basically, they seem like threats, and they are technically threats. They say we're going to sue you if you don't do some X or Y. But
and they often go into detail, like you could lose millions of dollars, or we will sue you for our costs, as well. That's all. Yeah.
They're threats. But they don't actually mean anything. And this took us a while to realize. We got our first one, when we started doing this. And we talked to lawyers, several lawyers actually. And some of them would say, well, you better do what they say because they've got a lot of money. And then others, notably the Electronic Frontier Foundation, said, well, they're threatening you, but they have to threaten you. They have to protect their trademark or their copyright. And if they don't, they're in trouble. So they just threaten you, and you can play with that. Like they might sue you, but they might not. And we've been doing this now for 20 years, and we've gotten a lot of those threats, and sometimes we've done a little something to placate them. Sometimes we've done exactly nothing and completely ignored it. Sometimes we've engaged in conversation with the lawyers and published the conversations, just playing with them. Sometimes we've used the threat to get more press. We've sent the threat out and said, look, we did this thing, and this big bad corporation is threatening us. Oh my God. It's like the best thing that can happen to you, in a way. Like no corporation has ever acted on their threat.
Except for one.
It's not, yeah,
we got sued by one called the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They're not part of the government. They're the largest lobbying organization in the world. I actually like to think of them as impersonators because they kind of masquerade as a department of the government, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, right? And they're right across from the White House. But they sued us after a little incident.
And the difference between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who did sue us, although they dropped the lawsuit after 4 years just when it was about to head to court, the difference between them and everybody else we've gone after is that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is basically a lobbying organization whose clients are big business, and they don't care about public opinion. Anybody who cares about public opinion, if you're doing something that people will understand and that you can publicize, they're going to not add to that. They're smart enough not to add to that. A thing happened maybe 15 years ago. Some activists were pamphleting against McDonald's in London. They were just standing outside various McDonald's and handing out pamphlets explaining how bad McDonald's food was, how bad for the environment, how bad for your health. And McDonald's turned around and sued them. And 10 years later, the activists won after dragging McDonald's through the worst public relations disaster in corporate history, basically. And that's the reason that McDonald's has healthy things on their menu now. Big deal, who cares? But they did react, and it was a disaster for them. So since that, and there's a movie about it called McLibel. So if you want to see that story, it's an excellent story called McLibel. Since then, corporations know better than to go after activists who seem to not have much power. But what we do have is humor and the ability to mock them. You know, it's the David and Goliath story. So if you can be the David, the Goliath will always lose in public opinion. Nobody's ever going to root for Dow Chemical against the yes men.
Except for a few CEOs. One thing that I should mention though is that there are actions that they might take that we don't know about. For example, we found out about some of them quite by accident. Dow Chemical had actually hired a company called Stratfor that is out of Austin, Texas, to spy on us. And we only found that out because Anonymous hacked Stratfor's computers and took 5 million of their useless emails and made them public via WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks actually emailed us. It turned out that they had been into our movies. And when they went through and they started searching randomly of those 5 million documents for keywords, they thought, well, let's see about if they've been looking at the yes men. And sure enough, they had been. And so then we had to go through and see what they'd been saying about us and what they'd been doing to follow us. It turned out to be kind of pathetic, low-grade spying, although I'm sure it was very expensive. It's
basically read student newspapers about our appearances at colleges like this. And, they wrote up a report saying, yeah, they spoke at this college and they were really clear about how bad Dow Chemical was, or, things like that.
I mean, then they would have analysts who would write kind of, little blurbs and reductions of what we'd been doing so that, it could be easily digested by the Dow people.
Yeah, there are places in the world where if you do this kind of thing, you get in serious trouble, and you can lose your life and your family's life and all kinds of things. So in those places, there are other tactics that activists use, and they do stuff, and they're incredibly brave. But here in our countries, there really isn't much risk to this. So,
although it also depends on the target. We did have one friend who had once targeted the porn industry, and he had people showing up at his house very soon offering to break his legs.
Don't target the porn industry. There was a question there. Yeah.
I was wondering, could you tell us about your most successful stunt yet?
Well,
it's funny you should ask. What should we play? This is the last one we did.
Yeah. Well, it really depends how you measure success. This, for example, got 600 articles in the press, so we consider it.
Not this, but the BBC
the thing that you just
watched.
Got 600 articles in the press, so we consider it really successful for that reason. We got tons of media coverage. That has happened periodically. Dow hasn't ended up doing the right thing. It didn't result in Dow doing the right thing, but the activists in Bhopal didn't really expect that it or anything else would do that. They're engaged in an epic fight. You know, for the last 30 years now. It's kind of, if they succeed, then the entire world changes. So it's a pretty big fight. Other things, many other things that we've been involved in have seemed not to have an effect in the immediate moment, but then, you know, cumulatively, along with the actions of many, many other activists over a long period, win and succeed and actually change things. So, you know, if you're looking for real change, there's a lot of actions that we've done that have contributed to fights that have won. It's impossible, though, to measure. You know, the only thing we can say is, well, this got some press and made some people laugh. This press wouldn't have happened without this, and, you know, contributed to a movement in some weird way that eventually won.
But sometimes you also want to just judge things based on how you feel about it, like you would a good piece of poetry or something. And I think that, you know, the last action that we did for our new film is an example of something that I think it's just close to my heart, and I think that we're excited about it in part because of the message, right? And this is about climate. The film is almost entirely about climate change, but it's also about social justice and just transition, a just energy transition, or how we can put this renewable energy infrastructure in the service of people in the environment and have the benefits from it really go back to people as well. So this is kind of a, you know, we'd been talking to a bunch of people who'd been working with indigenous organizations and indigenous people who were working to try to develop renewable energy projects on their land. And this is a big deal in some places in the world, especially like down in Oaxaca, where right now, because it's one of the windiest places in the world, there's a kind of new gold rush for new energy infrastructure. So they're siting, you know, large wind farms on these places, but they're corporate owned, and they're actually pushing people off their land. So even though, you know, these are people who are living in some of the hardest to live in places on Earth, the sunniest places, the windiest places, there's a whole other land grab going on now just in order to create this new green, so-called green energy. And so dealing with that dilemma and looking at the opportunities that lie in how we transition, not just if we transition, but how we transition, creates a really, I don't know, it's really it's fun and interesting to think about it. So we created this project in collaboration with some of those groups and people who we'd been talking to about what a just transition might look like. This is an event where we go to a Homeland Security conference. Now, we chose Homeland Security in part because if we're really thinking about security and the future, you know, not just short-term security like will somebody, you know, be shooting somebody in the back on the street today, but what, you know, what is the Earth going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years, and how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to deal with those problems? Then maybe the whole focus of Homeland Security and our security infrastructure and our military has been off for certainly the last 20 years. So that's largely what this is about.
Want a breakfast pear?
Yeah, awesome.
I made it. I've become very good at making pears.
Get a little more volume, please. Or do we do that?
So we have to work.
Yeah.
We need to get back in the saddle.
All right.
I mean, cheers.
Cheers. To settle.
Yes. We knew there was a way to pull the plug on big oil. But we needed some help. Ever since we met Gitz, we'd wanted to do something together. Posing as government bigwigs, we would infiltrate a Homeland Security conference and announce that the USA was outlawing fossil fuels and replacing them with renewables. And the best part? The new wind and solar power plants would be owned by native tribes as partial reparations for genocide.
To actually have white people wearing bands that say native headdress instead of a feather, a windmill, this is us making fun of the American ideal of what it is to be Indian.
This would truly be a second Thanksgiving. I told the conference that I represented General Colin Powell, and they were pumped to have him speak.
So our speakers are running just a tad late. We're not going to worry about it. General Colin Powell is coming to speak to us, and he's bringing a couple of colleagues.
General Powell, of course, would not show up, but his colleagues were nearly there.
Oh my God, you guys. Is this not going to be a total giveaway?
No.
Is there a way to, like, you know, maybe to make it a little less like it is?
Who's the other presentation?
Well, the Admiral, and he's followed by the Deputy of the Secret Service. So you've got two, like, exceedingly senior people.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to just confirm with them because he's so late. I'm beginning to wonder what's going on.
Is Mr. Benedict Gordon? Hi, I'm Barbara Alexander. I'm so glad to meet you.
Hello? Hi. I'm nervous. Me and Tito are sitting down. We're trying to make small talk. Have you tried yoga?
No, not yet. I need to. I'm having a hard time finding the yoga pants that'll fit.
That's the most weight I've ever seen on my face.
He's a scientist, so it's...
Does he do like a lot of like somebody went.
I don't know. That is a bad hair day. These guys weren't exactly tree-hugging eco-freaks. We had an aspiring Republican congressman, a two-star general, lots of defense contractors, and weird security guards in trench coats. How would they react to an energy revolution?
Our first speaker is Undersecretary of Policy Implementation at the Department of Energy, Mr. Benedict Waterman.
On behalf of the Department of Energy, I'm very excited to announce today a great new plan that will do nothing less than convert the United States energy grid into one that's powered entirely by renewable sources. As the dire reality of climate change becomes more and more inescapable, people will take the future into their own hands, and historically, we know that popular resistance is a force that can only with difficulty be countervailed. A revolutionary energy program today is easier than a real revolution tomorrow. By 2030, America will produce 100% of our energy from renewables, establishing us once again as a global leader in confronting the supreme challenge of climate change. We're excited to be working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and some of the largest tribes from Arizona to the Dakotas to site major wind and solar facilities that will provide a large chunk of America's power. The tribes will own these facilities. It'll provide an enormous stimulus to the economy and great resilience in the face of future threats. It's time for a second Thanksgiving.
I am Dana Slowhorse. I'm the Director of Industrial Development for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I am a member of the Wennabe Nation. Joining me is my nephew here. He's a fire chief, he's a war chief, a water chief. He's actually also a midwife. He helps young mothers. There's a long sordid history between the Americans and indigenous peoples. And it always hasn't been a beneficial relationship, at least not to us. For the first time, we have a voice, and we will own, truly own, this new energy production. And that's progress. And it'll build us a stronger economy, a brighter future. It will give something to our children. There was a lot of work done on Benedict's task, because we want to acknowledge and honor that. And so I actually went and killed a deer. I tanned the hide myself. Give you this gift.
That was good.
Come mark this grand occasion between our two peoples, we want to acknowledge us for the round dance. I encourage everybody to join us together. And just form a circle around all of this if possible.
All the way around.
Yeah, we can do all the way around. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me. I composed this song for this occasion. I made it a simple song so we can sing it together because it's not just my song, it belongs to all of us. Way out hey, way out ho.
It would be worthwhile, I think, get an opportunity to perhaps, chat with you or your staff, or whoever you deem appropriate.
What kind of effect do you expect this to have on the share price of the energy companies today?
This is ultimately going to benefit the economy tremendously.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
How did the midwifery come about for you?
So, yeah, I have a lot of sisters and
And a lot of grateful nieces and nephews.
Definitely.
So we're part of Northrop Grumman. We're a large business, but very interested in seeing how we can support this novel cause.
Okay. So, you can bring up the ASB there. So that, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So nice, hopeful action at the end of our movie. You can see our movie. We're coming in, it'll be coming here, I think, in mid-June, June 19th, if I'm not mistaken. Everything we've shown you today is just what we do and what we've talked about. But there are lots of things that a lot of people have done to find ways of giving journalists excuses to cover important issues. And there's a lot of inspiration to be found around that. So, for example, there's if you're interested in this kind of work, doing something that takes a lot of effort, but over a relatively short period of time, and you can actually create much more media attention than people with millions and millions of dollars to spend. You could browse around Actipedia, for example, and see hundreds of examples of things that people have done. Some of them like this, some of them much simpler, some of them things that you could do in an afternoon. You could visit beautifultrouble.org, which, nope, well, you can't do that right now. You can, but it has a lot, when it's working, it has a lot of great mind fodder. You can read through principles and tactics of creative resistance and how people do things, and it can be really thought-provoking. There's also a kind of more how-to section of our website, Action Switchboard. There's Everyday Rebellion, which is about global rebellion in places that face much worse problems than we do, or much harsher repression than we do. And there's Action Switchboard, which it has a cookbook section, which tells how we do what we do. I think it needs to be a little more prominent, but yeah, there it is. It gives a lot of pointers on thinking up ideas. It includes links to everything that, those resources and several more. It explains how to do things, how to go to a conference if you want to without being invited. Various ideas for that. And it describes some press strategies that you might think of, because it's all ultimately about press and how you package what you're doing and how you tell the story. Some of the most famous pranks or actions in history have maybe not even happened. Like the Yippies threw dollar bills on the stock exchange floor and the brokers dove for them. I see some heads nodding. A lot of people have heard of that. It may not have happened. That was just what the Yippies told the reporters when they exited the tour. There were no pictures of it. So a lot of it's storytelling and how you package and get the story to the media.
We actually also, for the Action Switchboard, we are signing people up because the Action Switchboard is an online platform that enables people to connect to carry out creative actions. And sometimes people might just be interested in getting a tiny bit of help, even a little bit of technical help or something like that. So you would go, you fill out your profile, your issues that you care about, how you might want to help if you want to help with anything. And then when somebody lists a project, or if you list a project and need people, the switchboard and the switchboard operators connect you to each other so that you can communicate and potentially collaborate on those projects. So we're circulating an email list for anybody who wants to join up. We'll also tell you, I guess, when our movie is coming out. If you're in the workshop and signed up, you don't have to do it again. Here you go. Thanks.
There's also a lot of projects you can read about on yeslab.org. A lot projects that we've developed together with activist groups that have wanted to use these techniques. So,
was that a question? I saw a hand. No. One of the reasons that we started this Action Switchboard thing is that for many years we've been collecting email addresses like this, and occasionally we would be somewhere where we had an action that we were working on, and we would invite people to participate. And it's been really fun, but it wasn't enough. You know, people would say, I signed up 2 years ago, and I'm waiting for you guys to come and do an action with me. And we'd say, well, there's 2 of us. We don't have that much time. We're trying, but we might not make it to Portland. But there's a lot of people in Portland who are interested in, engaging, and sometimes engaging with a little bit of mischief. And so if you meet each other, I'm sure you'll be able to do some interesting things in the near future. Actually, for that last action, which was in DC, there were a bunch of people from our mailing list who came and joined in, who just, joined us for the occasion. So making it much more interesting. Even one of the guys in military uniform, there's a guy in the military on our mailing list who joined in. So, we may have allies in places you wouldn't necessarily expect.
So I guess we have a few more minutes if there's any other questions about how you do these things, or yep. No. I mean, it depends how you define arrested. We we did one thing in our second movie, which I think you can see on YouTube. The Yes Men Fix the World, right in the middle of it.
You can also buy the DVD from us in the back.
If you want to spend money, we have DVDs. But right in the middle, right in the middle, there's an action where we got ourselves invited to an oil luncheon, as speakers at an oil luncheon in Calgary, Alberta, at a giant, the Rodeo Stampede Convention Center. It was a giant oil conference, and we got ourselves invited as representatives of the U.S. Department of Energy and Exxon. And we presented a talk in which we showed a video. We described Exxon's plan for what to do about climate change, which is when climate change hits, and we're obviously not going to slow down oil production. It's too valuable, all those trillions of dollars in the ground. We've got to get them out. So when it gets really bad and, conflict erupts and drought and, Bangladesh goes under and all that, billions of people are going to die, that's a new fuel source. People. And we have this whole history of how whales used to be used for fuel, and petroleum replaced that, and you can light puffins on fire, all kinds of stuff. And we give this talk, and people are just kind of, they're listening, they're eating, they're looking, they're hearing it, and then we we pass out some candles in the shape of a person, and we light the candles, and we say we're going to have a little ceremony for somebody at Exxon who's died. We show the video of that guy who's representing the candle saying, yeah, I've been working here for a long time. He's an Exxon janitor. He's wearing the thing. And he says, yeah, I've been working here a long time. And you know, I found out I had cancer because of exposure to these chemicals, but, you know, I'm really excited about this new pilot program to, you know, he doesn't say turn people into fuel, but he intimates it, and he says, well, when I die, I'd like to be turned into candles. That's what I'd like. And then people are looking at their lit candles, which we made, and we filled them with hair so that they would stink. And so people are looking at them and smelling them and like really having some reactions. And in the middle of all this, somebody at one of the tables recognized us from our movie. So she texted the conference organizers, and throughout the whole thing, the conference organizers tried to figure out what the hell to do about this. They told the security guards to please go stop us. They didn't stop us because that made no sense. So they actually had to come up and grab us physically, but it was after everybody was looking at their candles and freaking out. So it actually ended up pretty good for the film. It's funny. We didn't even include in the film the fact that she recognized us. It just looked like the conference organizers are reacting and they get it and they realize it's critical. But in fact, it was because she recognized us. And then we got arrested by the security guards.
But it wasn't really arrested because it was private security. So they brought us to a holding room where they locked us in. But it was one of those rooms where people punch their cards. It wasn't a jail or anything. They didn't have that really for us. So then they called the real police.
And the whole time we're telling them, you know, this is an outrage. You can't hold us. We're from Exxon. We're from the U.S. government. Your heads are gonna roll. And of course, they don't buy it.
Then the real police come in and they make the other guys leave. And they shut the door. And then they sort of break out laughing and say, okay, come on, guys, what's really happening here? And we say, okay, well, these are our real names. This is what we're doing. We tell them the truth, the whole truth. And they say, okay, well, this is pretty funny, but those guys are really angry. They were very Canadian. And they said, what? We're going to go talk to them. We'll be back. Do you guys need some coffee or tea? So the police go off and get us coffee and tea, and then try to negotiate with the angry conference guys. And at the end, the police wrote us a ticket. And on the way out, they said, you know, you guys, you don't need to do anything about these. We're not going to show up in court or anything. We had to write you a ticket for trespassing because those guys were so angry. So the real police, no, not arrested.
That night we were, or maybe it was the next day, we were giving a talk like this and telling the story. And somebody in the audience was a lawyer, and she said, I'm going to make sure you go to trial, because she realized that would be really funny. And so she took the ticket and wrote down the number, started tracing it through the system, and she really, you know, she did her best to make the charges stick somehow. I think she wrote in and said, you know, we're very excited to, I don't know what she said, but they threw it out. The court threw it out.
We didn't get our day in court. Too bad. All right, well, I guess are we officially out of time for real?
Are we out of time?
It's 12:03.
Organizers.
You guys have things to do? You have to eat lunch or something? Well, we really want to thank you for having us here. It's been excellent, and it's great to be here in Portland, where there's so much to do and so much being done and so much still at stake with, you know, all these issues. You know, you'd think that it wouldn't affect Portland, things like oil trains and, you know, depots for gas and, you know, water extraction, but it's all happening. So, so there's a lot to do. So if you can sign up for the Action Switchboard, we'll try to connect you to other people doing things in the area. And of course, if this is not your thing, if you're not into mischief, there's also a lot you can do that's completely traditional and totally useful.
Yeah. And one thing that's happening not far in Seattle is these people are going to try to get together 1,000 kayaks to blockade Shell's Arctic drilling rigs, which are coming into the port of Seattle very soon, and maybe in 2 weeks. And May 16th is this event. They're going to basically blockade them in there and not let them leave for the Arctic. This is a strange example of police collaboration because the Coast Guard hates Shell and is making them come into Seattle, which is like going into the, you know, the viper's nest or whatever the expression is. And this is an opportunity to really mess with them. So if you like to kayak, I'll bet there will be some carpooling.
And we have a couple of things for sale back there if anybody's interested in, you know, a gift for a friend, you know, birthday, Christmas, whatever. We have some movies, we have some books, and some fake newspapers that we published at one time or another. Anyway, thank you so much for having us here on Earth Day or the day after.